As the Allies and the Soviets advanced throughout Nazi-occupied territory and lands, they came across networks of concentration camps. It was inside these complexes that the true crimes of the Third Reich were carried out, and it was inside of these camps that millions were exterminated and murdered in horrific fashion. As each camp was liberated, the horrors of the SS Guards' brutality and evil was told to those soldiers who freed the prisoners. There were war crimes trials that took place after World War II to bring the perpetrators of the Holocaust to justice, and the most high profile were the Nuremberg trials. Other trials took place to bring the guards of specific camps to face their crimes, for example the Auschwitz trials and the Belsen trials. However, upon the liberation of Dachau, a huge concentration camp, where it's estimated over 188,000 people passed through the gates, the American liberators sought to carry out some immediate justice, executing a number of SS guards in bloody reprisals for the crimes they had committed. Join us today as we look at the brutal executions of the Dachau Liberation Reprisals, and remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. When Dachau opened on the 22nd of March 1933, it was the prototype camp. It initially was planned to hold political prisoners, but as the Second World War and the persecution of the Jews continued, other prisoners found themselves inside the infamous camp. It was opened by Heinrich Himmler and was a place of much suffering and forced labour. It grew to a huge size, including almost 100 subcamps that served the main Dachau complex. During the first year, the camp had around 5,000 prisoners, and these were mostly German communists and political opponents of the Nazi regime. But soon, other groups such as Jehovah's Witnesses and Gypsies found themselves inside. As the persecution of the Jews increased in 1938, following Kristallnacht, around 11,000 Jewish men were imprisoned in Dachau. Prisoners were forced to work inside of the munitions factory, and as the camp expanded, more forced labour was ordered in brutal conditions. Prisoners were kept heavily guarded, and some guards were even known to have shot at prisoners indiscriminately. The guards were terrible to the inmates. Some stole their caps and then threw them into a no-man's land area near to the fences, knowing that the guards would then shoot them dead as the prisoners tried to get their hats back. Some prisoners even decided to end their suffering and lives wandering into the zone before they were shot by the guards. Guards regularly beat the prisoners of Dachau, often many of them beat prisoners to death as well. There were many examples of inmates being tortured by the SS guards. For example, they were often strung up to trees by their arms, with them held behind them to maximise the pain. Also, they were forced to stand for hours in roll call, but executions were also common inside of the complex. There was a crematorium area set up in 1942, but it's not entirely sure whether the gas chambers were in use at Dachau, but the SS took action into their own hands. They used the firing range heavily to shoot dead prisoners who weren't fit enough to work, or who had committed crimes as small as stealing bread as they were starving. They also used gallows to publicly hang prisoners, especially those of a political nature. Also at the camp, medical experiments took place that were sadistic. The doctors killed hundreds of prisoners in sick medical trials and even euthanized many prisoners to simply perform autopsies. As the Second World War continued, the amount of prisoners at Dachau rose heavily, and in August 1944, a women's camp was opened. But in the final months of the war, the conditions at Dachau, like in many other concentration camps, deteriorated rapidly. The Allies pushed towards Germany, and the Germans began to move prisoners from other camps to those closer to the German heartland, and many were transported to Dachau. With the Soviets advancing throughout former Nazi-occupied lands, the Nazis would move prisoners back from camps set up further east, back towards Germany. This meant that camps in Germany such as Dachau swelled heavily in their numbers. This caused a huge strain on resources at the camp, and prisoners arrived there often having been force-marched with no food and water, and they arrived close to death, incredibly weak and tired. There was a severe lack of food at Dachau, and also disease became a huge problem, as it became very overcrowded, and typhus epidemics caused a huge number of deaths in the final days. The constant overcrowding left no space for people to sleep, and within the final 6 months of the camp, before liberation, over 15,000 people died from disease, starvation and execution including 500 Soviet POWs who were shot dead. Prisoners continued to arrive as late as the 19th of April 1945, and during that month, the US Army were driving deeper into Bavaria, and it was suggested to Himmler that the camp should be turned over to the Allies. It was said by Himmler that no prisoner shall be allowed to fall into the hands of the enemy alive, refusing this request. Days before the Allies arrived at Dachau, the Commandant and SS guards sent around 7,000 prisoners on a death march, and any prisoner who could not keep up was shot. Many died from exhaustion, and along the route a mass grave housing over 1,000 prisoners was found, with the SS shooting them indiscriminately. Inside, 200 people were dying each day, but on the 29th of April 1945, soldiers from the 3rd Battalion, 157th Infantry Regiment and the 45th Infantry Division, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Felix Sparks, approached Dachau. They found 39 railway boxcars with over 2,000 corpses inside on the railway tracks outside of the camp. They found murdered bodies and they saw hell on earth. They were greeted by decaying corpses, the sight of emaciated bodies and desperation everywhere. As the soldiers advanced, some SS soldiers continued to fire at the Americans, despite being told to surrender. As the soldiers moved deep into the complex, they found more bodies. Many had been dead for days before the capture of the camp, and there were houses with just bodies piled inside of, from floor to ceiling. It was said that the stench of death was overpowering. The camp's commandant Martin Weiss had already fled the camp, with many SS men, and an SS Untersturmführer was left in charge, with over 500 SS personnel. Dachau was surrendered on the 29th of April to the Allies. It was said when the camp was turned over, as we approached the southwest corner, 3 people came forward with a flag of truce. We met them about 75 yards north of the southwest corner. These 3 people were a Swiss Red Cross representative, Victor Maurer, and 2 SS troopers, who said they were the camp commander and his assistant. They had come here on the night of the 28th to take over from the regular camp personnel for the purpose of surrendering the camp to the advancing Americans. The Swiss Red Cross representative said there were about 100 SS guards in the camp who had their arms, and there were people inside of the tower. He had given instructions that there would be no shots fired, and it would take about 50 men to relieve the guards, and there were 42,000 half-crazed inmates, many of them typhus infected. Supreme Allied Commander Dwight Eisenhower issued a press release on the liberation, saying that our forces liberated and mopped up the infamous concentration camp at Dachau. Approximately 32,000 prisoners were liberated, 300 SS camp guards were quickly neutralised. Now what Eisenhower referred to as the camps being neutralised was a huge massacre of SS guards that were based at Dachau, and the American soldiers, disgusted by what they had witnessed, tried to enact some instant revenge onto some SS guards. The evidence we have on the reprisal executions comes from the men who were there that liberated the camp. Lieutenant Colonel Sparks, who helped to liberate it, stated how he witnessed about 50 German prisoners captured by soldiers, and then they were surrounded in an area used for storing coal. The area was enclosed by a masonry wall, and the German POWs were guarded by a machine gun team. As Sparks left the area, he heard a soldier screaming, "They're trying to get away," and then he heard machine gun fire coming from there. As he went back, he kicked a 19-year-old soldier who was armed with the machine gun, who had shot dead 12 of the SS prisoner guards and wounded several more. The gunner was crying and claimed they tried to escape, but Sparks doubted the story. He went on to say it was a foregoing incident which has given rise to wild claims in various publications that most or all of the German prisoners captured at Dachau were executed. Nothing could be further from the truth. The total number of guards killed at Dachau during the day mostly certainly did not exceed 50, with 30 being the most accurate figure. The regimental records for that date indicate that over 1,000 German prisoners were brought to the regimental collecting point. Since my task force was leading the regimental attack, almost all prisoners were taken by the task force, including several hundred from Dachau. More accounts of reprisal killings at Dachau emerged. For example, it was claimed in one book that the US forces killed 520 German soldiers on the order of a lieutenant in a mass execution in a courtyard, hours after the initial incident with the machine gun. He also supported what Sparks said about seeing 15 or 16 dead SS officers lying along the wall, having been mowed down by machine gun fire. This testimony also stated that it was not known if medical care was sought for those who were not instantly killed by the shooting. Another account states how some of the Nazis were rounded up and executed along with guard dogs. According to a German historian, it was claimed that 16 SS men were shot in the courtyard, 17 were shot dead in Tower B, and a few more were killed by US soldiers in reprisal shootings. Anywhere from 25 to 50 were also killed by inmates. Many of the SS guards were grabbed as they tried to flee the Americans, who were advancing and engaged in the shootout as the camp was liberated. It was said that prisoners caught the SS men. The first SS man elbowed one or two prisoners out the way, but the courage of the prisoners mounted. They knocked them down, and nobody could see whether they were stomped or what, but they were killed. Also in Dachau, SS men, capos, and other collaborators were beaten with shovels, sticks, and anything the prisoners could find. US soldiers were said on one account to have turned a blind eye to a beating when they saw prisoners beating a German guard to death with a shovel, and it was said there wasn't much left of this specific guard afterwards. An official investigation was ordered by the US Army to investigate the executions and killings following the liberation of Dachau. It was reported that close to the back entrance of the camp, the commander of I Company, Lieutenant William P. Walsh, shot 4 Germans who had surrendered inside of a boxcar, and then a private climbed into the boxcar and delivered a coup de grace to the wounded German men. When he entered the camp, he organised the separation of the prisoners into those who were Wehrmacht army soldiers and those who were SS men. It was then said that the SS were marched into a different enclosure, and then they were shot by members of I Company, who were armed with many different weapons. So when Dachau was liberated, it's clear that a number of SS guards were shot by the Americans in reprisals. After discovering the truly barbaric and disgusting scenes that the SS had caused with the mass killings of prisoners and the cruelty they inflicted, it's easy to see how the American soldiers sought to inflict some quick justice of their own. It's clear that the Allied liberators were disturbed and greatly angered by finding the mass corpses and the starving and dying masses, and they sought to take revenge. Many of the guards who were at the camp did open fire on the Americans as they approached the camp, which in a sense could have been used to justify actions against them, but once the executions and shootings took place, these guards were ultimately considered prisoners of war. At Dachau, it's estimated that over 40,000 prisoners were killed by the terrible conditions and by executions inside of the camp during its time operating. The incident involving reprisals upon liberation, it's estimated took the lives of up to 50 soldiers. It's likely that the emotion upon discovering the camp took over the US soldiers, and it's possible that the executions were ordered of the SS officers and guards. Once again, thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.